Today on Comicstorian, what is life like for Matt Murdock now that Daredevil is dead? This is the Comicstorian channel where I take some of your favorite trade paperbacks and single issues and I break them down into digestible bites. We turn them into a synopsis, cutting out a lot of the fluff and extra stuff so that you can go pick up these issues and get more context in the amazing art, or you can go out to your local digital retailer and get the follow-up issues and figure out what's going on that way. All alterations to the panels, text, and images are to prevent copyright problems, and all art is owned by its respective companies. Today we're going to be continuing our storyline of Daredevil written by Chip Zdarsky. I'll link the prior two videos down below, but let me catch you up real quick. Daredevil accidentally killed a man, and after trying to find who was setting him up, he realized he did in fact kill a man. He battled against some of his old friends, got in a fight with the Punisher, and was confronted by Spider-Man, but he has officially decided to let the world think that Daredevil is dead. Except the world won't let that happen. Let's continue the storyline today, as Matt has now officially given up Daredevil. The sun peeks over the edges of the buildings, bringing another new day to New York City. Janet leans against the wall with her coffee, not sure why they need to open up the watch shop so early, and Marcus keeps fiddling with the key, once again explaining the reason, but she interrupts him, pointing across the street where some thugs are breaking into Kaplan's party store. The thug smiles at her as a cop car zooms past, giving no attention to those breaking the law. She wants to do something, but Marcus reminds her that they've already tried to help Kaplan pay the owl for his protection last month. We have to pay for our own protection, he sighs as he finally opens the door, heading inside, leaving the corruption of the city behind for a moment. The cops are useless, and Daredevil is dead. Meanwhile, at the precinct, Cole North still can't help thinking about Daredevil as he doodles on a piece of paper. Higgins interrupts his thoughts, telling him that the captain wants to see him, and he reaches for the doodle, shaking his head. "Oh my god, pal, are you?" Higgins begins, but Cole interrupts him as he stands and heads for the captain's office, passing two of the detectives who both glare at him. "Captain, I'm gonna give you some new orders. Maybe get you to arrest some firefighters this time?" They grumble under their breath, but Cole doesn't even bother looking at them. "Detective Elias, Detective Henry," he says simply and keeps walking right into the captain's office, sitting in front of her desk as she goes over that he was highly recommended from Chicago. "And yet you appear to me as useless as an abstinence talk at my old summer camp," she says, pointing out that he's been at the precinct for months, and he's only had a fist fight with Daredevil to show for it. She points out that Mayor Fisk isn't happy about the vigilantes. None of the detectives want to arrest those that help them do their jobs either. "Go figure," she sighs, and puts down a file asking how North's case against Spider-Man is working out. "It's been slower moving forward, due to the amount of area that he covers, plus his speed. I think going after Frank Castle makes more," he begins to tell her, but she holds up her hand, telling him to leave her office. As he enters into the main precinct, he receives nothing but glares from the fellow officers. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock is walking through his neighborhood, finally having given up his life as Daredevil and seemingly enjoying it. Elsewhere, Wilson Fisk is fighting off a group of criminals, one trying to jump on his back, but he grabs the man by the head, flipping him over and whirling on another, the man holding a brick in his hands. "I said no weapons," Fisk hisses as he rushes forward, grabbing the man by the throat. He begins to squeeze the very life out of this man's body, images of Daredevil flooding in his mind, but a voice stays his hand. "Sir, I'm afraid the deal with the warden was to bring the prisoners back alive," Wesley reminds him. The words bring Fisk out of his rage as he drops the prisoner to the ground, apologizing to Wesley for his actions. "My mind was elsewhere," he explains. And Matt continues to walk through the city on his way to work, deciding to step into a nearby used bookstore. "Excuse me, do you work here?" he asks the cute woman who's putting books back on the shelf, and she comes down, and Matt notes that she doesn't even pause when she realizes that he's blind. A refreshing take. He smiles at her, asking if she has an early edition of Bleak House. While the woman is explaining that she doesn't, she explains that she can find him one. He continues to smile, noting that with his heightened senses, he realizes that she isn't attracted to him in the least bit. After she agrees to find the book, he hands her his card. "Wait, Murdock? Weren't you the mayor?" "For a heartbeat," he says with a smile, and she introduces herself, explaining that her husband's family owns the shop, and that he should just keep being the mayor. "You've got that faux charm down pat," she says, and they wave goodbye and Matt continues to work. Meanwhile, Cole continues to pore over the files on Spider-Man before finally calling it a night. He says goodbye to his partner, heading out the door, not seeing the two detectives that have begun to follow him into the night. Elsewhere, Mayor Fisk continues to shower off as Wesley reads him tomorrow's schedule, but Wilson interrupts, pointing out that Wesley stopped him today, stopped him from making a big mistake that would have caused issues for his work as mayor. "If you had done that a year ago, I would have killed that man and then you," he says. He steps out of the shower, putting a towel around himself, ordering Wesley to call the families together. "I require an audience." Meanwhile, Matt Murdock finally arrives late for his shift as a parole officer, thanking the officers working for getting his case files done in Braille. He walks into the first meeting, introducing himself to his client, beginning to read off the list of rules and what is required of him. "I want to stress the no drugs or alcohol stipulation." The man nods, explaining that he's clean and that he's been doing the drug tests. Matt pauses for a moment before standing and walking around the table, getting close to his client, leaning against the edge. "You've been drinking beer, a bit of rum, but more concerning is that you reek of crack cocaine. And you either peed yourself or you have a bag of urine for the drug test." He ignores the shocked look on his client's face and he keeps talking, explaining to his client that he has one goal: to keep him out of jail and help him get out of the system. "I'm trying to keep you out of prison. The system is broken, but it is the system. Let's get you out. Deal?" Matt says, holding out his hand to shake. Meanwhile, Cole has realized that he has a tail and he knows that they are cops. He knows that they plan on jumping him on his way home, and he leads them through the park instead, managing to give them the slip as he hides behind some trees. But there are more. They jump him from behind, all cops not bothering to hide their faces. They hit Cole hard. He tries to block, protect his head, but they're over him, raining blows on his body when suddenly there's a gunshot and the cops go down, rounds ripping into their bodies. Cole tries to look up. His vision is hazy, but he sees a smiling face leaning over him, and the man tells him, "Thanks from the owl for getting rid of Daredevil." The next morning, Janet walks into Kaplan's party store, smiling at Kaplan, asking where he keeps his balloons. She needs them for Marcus's birthday. 2 aisles over, on the house for the help you guys gave me last month, he tells her as he continues to stock the shelves. She heads towards the aisle, but hears the door open again. Kaplan begins to plead for more time. "Mr. Owlsy thinks we're being a little too soft on you on account of you being a source of joy." The thugs laugh as Janet peers around the shelves. She sees them grabbing Kaplan. She doesn't know what to do, but her hands reach out and find a metal bar. She breathes deep, trying to decide, but she turns, her eyes widening as she looks up an aisle of superhero costumes and masks, and the Daredevil costume stares down at her, beckoning her. Meanwhile, Detective North sits up in his hospital bed, staring angrily ahead as he recounts the events of the previous night to the detectives in his room. "I heard Detective Tyler survived a shooting. When he's up and about, I expect him to be arrested for assaulting an officer. I don't believe that it was attempted murder," he says finally, and the detectives try to talk him out of it, but he shakes his head. "Do the job, detective. No matter what, do the job," he says quietly. Meanwhile, members of Fisk's security team greet Owlsy as he walks through the door of the empty bank, and they lead him back to the vault where he's surprised to find the other heads of the crime families all waiting. "Sit," Fisk orders him as he puts his massive hand on the man's shoulder. With everyone finally gathered, he calms their fears about a potential hit, and he explains that he has come to realize that he no longer has the drive for the criminal life. As mayor, he became content. The criminal empires are running smoother than they ever have before, with most of the families respecting each other's territories. His position as mayor has helped them all. Because of this, he's planning on stepping back, dividing his men and his holdings amongst the other families, as long as they continue to observe the peace and pay him his percentages. "The city is mine, but the city beneath the city is yours. Conduct yourselves accordingly," he says as he turns and walks out of the vault. Meanwhile, Matt Murdock and Foggy sit at a small bistro enjoying their morning coffee as Foggy looks at the paper. He asks if the supposed Daredevil sightings are Matt's doing. Matt leans forward, holding his hand as he whispers to Foggy, Whoa. Just because I'm retired doesn't mean you can shout in public about my old job." And he leans back. And second, that's not me. It's either a copycat or just wishful thinking by the papers, he says as he reaches for his briefcase. He pulls out Foggy's birthday present, smiling as his friend opens it to find a first edition Bleak House. "Thanks, man. Where'd you get it?" Foggy asks in wonder, and Matt smiles as he thinks of the woman at the store, Mindy. He tells Foggy that he just got it from a local bookstore. Finally, he stands, pulling out his cane, apologizing to Foggy and explaining that he's going to be late for work. And it doesn't take long for Matt to reach his offices, where he accepts the files for his first appointment. He greets Joey as he steps into the office, sitting down, explaining that he just wants to catch up on the case. "It seems like you had 2 job interviews. How'd they go?" Matt asks, but Joey quickly explains that they went badly, and he desperately needs money to quickly help his mother. He explains that that's why he got caught in the first place. He had to step up selling drugs since his brother died. Stupid. I thought he was done with that. But he pulled some small-time robbery with a buddy and Daredevil killed him. Getting sad for a moment, he keeps talking, but Matt can only hear the blood rushing through his body. He stumbles to his feet with Joey asking if everything's okay, and Matt tells him that he just needs to step outside for a moment. He closes the office door, leaning against the wall, loosening his tie as he begins to breathe heavy, his heart pounding in his chest as he realizes that he did this to Joey and his family. It's later that night that Sister Elizabeth finds Matt sitting on the steps outside of the church. She goes to him, asking if there's anything that she can do to help. He tells her that he was just confronted by the consequences of his own sins, and that he never really stopped and faced what his actions have brought. That he's realized that he's possibly using his religion to justify the violence in his life, that he doesn't think that he deserves God's forgiveness anymore. But Sister Elizabeth puts her hand on his shoulder, explaining that he isn't special, that many people have felt this way throughout history, that his self-loathing doesn't exclude him from God's love. Later that night, two women are walking down the street when they're suddenly jumped by two robbers. But somebody comes across the street in the dark, leaping into the fight, helping the struggling women. Someone in a Daredevil mask. Somebody grabs this Daredevil from behind and they slam them against the wall, punching them in the face. And the fight only takes a few seconds, but everyone is left gasping and unconscious on the ground. In his apartment, Matt reaches for the phone again, reporting the assault nearby, and he pauses, sitting in the dark, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. He dials the phone and reports the robbery. And he waits. Dials the phone, reports another robbery, and he continues doing this long into the night. The next day, Matt walks into the bookstore, greeting Mindy and telling her that he just wanted to stop by and say hello. "So you're a retail creep," she tells him with a smile, explaining that it's someone who thinks that politeness and excellent customer service is flirting. Well, to be fair, most people flirt with me because I'm an attractive low-level celebrity. He tells her, still smiling, but he waves his hand and just tells her that he's only here to say hello and thank her for her help. "Truly my pleasure, Mr. Murdock. You may be a retail creep, but you're my retail creep," she says, and Matt begins to turn and go. But he stops to sniff the air, asking if someone is making a pork loin. "My mother-in-law and husband are cooking upstairs. That's impressive," she says as she stares at him in shock. She finally breaks down and invites him over for dinner with her family. "We do family-style dinners with guests all the time, and my husband will get a kick out of meeting you." Matt pauses for a moment before accepting. Outside the city, Mayor Fisk fires his rifle, taking out another bird from the sky. He then continues his hunting trip with the New York governor. They talk briefly about Fisk's supposed past before he finally makes his offer to the governor, agreeing to split the land that he owns for growing and selling drugs, if the governor will help him hold back the legalization of certain drugs until their business is secured. The governor smiles and agrees to help Fisk and put him in touch with the right people. "Have you ever met the Stormwinds?" the governor asks as he misses another bird. "I have not, but they're a reputation," Fisk begins, but the governor interrupts him and explains that they're hosting a dinner party for their wealthy friends soon. He looks up to the big man, explaining that he was a little worried to come out into the woods with them. "I've actually set my men up in the woods, snipers, in case things went south," he says with a smile as he points over his shoulder. Wilson nods, firing again, taking out another bird, and he turns to leave. "I know. My men are behind your men." That night, Matt arrives at Mindy's house, bringing a bottle of wine. She leads him inside and introduces him to the members of the family. Her brother-in-law leads him through the kitchen, introducing him to Mindy's husband, and at the sound of his voice, Matt suddenly stops as he realizes whose Mindy's family is. Dante continues to lead him through the door to the dining room, where he's introduced to Isit Libris. Matt immediately recognizes their woman, her mother, Lavita Libris, Mindy's husband, Tom Libris. A little taken back, Matt sits at the head of the table, the special guest of honor to the Libris crime family. The dinner begins awkwardly, with members of the family pointing out that Matt was a lawyer and the former mayor, working hard against the crime families of the city. "Mr. Murdock, do you know who I am?" Lizzie finally asks, and Matt pauses for a moment before finally looking up. Yes, beginning to list off everything he knows about the crime family, how they've never been convicted of any major crimes, how they control Hell's Kitchen, and how Lizzie seems to have gotten out of the drug business after one of her sons OD'd. She smiles at him after he finishes, holding up her wine glass and taking a sip. "That's quite impressive. I'm surprised that you would agree to eat with us in our home if you believed such a thing." Matt nods, explaining that he hadn't made the connection. "And I probably would have declined the invitation if I had known," he tells her. Lizzie explains that he's free to leave. but knows that he won't since he follows not only the law of the city, but also the laws of polite society. The two then begin a long discussion about how the laws of the criminal world are far more equality-based and fair than the laws of the city that Matt has dedicated his life to. That the laws of the government are merely designed to help the wealthy and push out the poor, either making their lives miserable or keeping them locked away. The rich feed the poor. They keep them down and they push them out, Lizzie tells him. But Matt holds up his hands, telling her that these are merely delusions that the criminals use to justify what they're doing. In the end, criminals always get what's coming to them. Lizzie takes another sip of her wine, admitting that she has thought the same thing before. Maybe they should pack up the family business before it gets too difficult, before they slip up. Your friend, Mayor Fisk, knows, she explains, and Matt is stunned as she tells him that Fisk has packed up his empire, gone legit. It's not true. He must be up to something. Matt begins to stutter, stunned by the news, but he suddenly senses something from outside the window, the building across the street. Everyone down, now! He shouts, but he's already moving, grabbing a nearby bottle of wine. He grabs Mindy's daughter, leaping to the floor as the bullets suddenly explode through the window. Matt rolls, throwing the bottle of wine and breaking the legs out from Grandma's chair, throwing her to the floor. The gunfire stops as Matt tosses the child to Mindy. Stay down. I don't know if the shooter's still out there, he shouts, but Tom gets up, rushing out of the room as Mindy and Matt try to make sure that everyone is safe. Dante is wounded and Matt begins to put pressure on the wound as he tells Mindy to call the police. A short time later, Matt is sitting nearby, having finished answering the police questions about the shooting. I highly doubt that you were the target, but I feel that you're going to need protection, the officer tells him, but Matt explains that he's fine and the cop moves away. Before you go, a voice calls out before Matt can even get up. He turns towards Detective North as he crosses the street. Cole introduces himself to Matt as he helps him up, asking if he is the same Matt Murdock that helped a man sue Daredevil a few years ago. Yes, I've had a few encounters with Daredevils over the years, but he's dead, isn't he? Cole nods, but explains that he keeps popping up, like an infection. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. What does Daredevil have to do with what happened here? Matt asks him, and Cole nods, explaining that the shooter ran and a civilian gave chase. We recovered the civilian's body 2 blocks back from here. A guy dressed normally except that he was wearing a Daredevil mask. Cole holds up a bag of evidence even though Matt can sense what's inside and he knows. Cole sighs. Daredevil, why won't he die? He says to Matt. And that concludes today's chapter of Daredevil by Chip Zdarsky. As I've said before, this is 37 issues. There's no way I can do it all in one sitting, so check back every Friday for the continuation to the Daredevil storyline. We're going to find out what happened now that Matt has given up Daredevil and the city is taking up arms and putting on the mask. Where's that going to go? Well, you can go read the book yourself by clicking the link down below, or just wait until next Friday. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you know next week when we put up the next chapter of this, and I'll see you guys next time right here.